Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the third episode of Smart Talks Bar by Joanna. And today we delve into a critical issue that affects Sabah's future. The Sabah Law Society's fight for the state's 40% entitlement of net revenue. And I'm your host, Joanna Suhenli Rampas, and today we have a truly special guest with us. He's a dedicated legal luminary who is the president of the Sabah Law Society, Mr. Roger Chin.
Hello.
Roger,
Hi.
welcome to Smart Talks Bar.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks for coming tonight. Malaysian Agreement 1963 was a key moment uniting Malaya, Singapore, Sarawak and Sabah into Malaysia. And it guaranteed Sabah's 40% entitlement to certain revenues. It is a crucial provision. However, debates and legal challenges about how this entitlement is upheld have risen over the years. And this ongoing discussion highlights the importance of preserving Sabah's rights as originally intended in the MA63 and, of course, our constitution. So going through the chronology that has been happening over the past 1 year, in order to seek legal recourse, an application was made for a court of appeal for the federal government to uphold the constitutional rights of Sabah as stipulated in Article 112C and Section 21, Part 4 of the 10th Schedule to the federal constitution. A judicial review by the Sabah Law Society against the federal government of Malaysia was done on the 9th of June 2022. And, September has been a very dynamic month for this case. The initial suit by a political party in Sabah against the federal and state government of Sabah on the 3rd of June last year was then withdrew. They withdrew the initial suit filed against the federal government on the 20th of September. So in this episode, ladies and gentlemen, we aim to explore the historical, legal and contemporary aspects of Sabah's 40% entitlement to better understand our constitutional framework and responsibilities in upholding these rights. So Roger, for starters, right, let's look into the historical significance of the 40% entitlement. Yeah. And I think it is also very important for us to first comprehend the history of the 40% entitlement for Sabah. So perhaps you could, guide us through the historical context regarding, why the 40% Sabah entitlement was included in the constitution, and in retrospect, what factors were considered at that point of time?
Okay, I think what's important to take note of is at that time, obviously you had the British wanting to withdraw from Malaysia,
right,
and wanting to give independence to Malaysia, Sabah and Sarawak, which were their colonies via North Borneo Company or whatever. They wanted to leave this part of the world and let us have independence, these several bodies, including Singapore, of course.
Yeah.
So what happened was, obhetly, they held a referendum, the Cobalt Commission, right? And they went around asking Sabahans about whether or not they would like to join Malaysia. So the long and short of it is, when Sabah finally joined Sarawak and Malaya to form, and Singapore actually, to form Malaysia.
Right.
These were the safeguards that were given to Sabah and Sarawak for that matter, our 20 points and Sarawak's 18 points, in order to ensure that Sabah had a chance of catching up. Because you must remember, at the very early stages already, you had the issue of Malaya obviously being very well developed,
correct,
compared to Sabah and Sarawak. And this 40% special grant, which is unique to Sabah, by the way. Sarawak has got a grant, but that grant is just a figure, okay? And in fact, that figure, for the life of me, I can't work out what it is based on.
Right.
It's just a figure. If you look at the constitution, there are figures there. But the Sabah constitution, the Malaysian constitution obviously provided for this 40%, especially for Sabah. No other states in Malaysia has it. And I wonder whether or not that is reflective of how far back we were.
At that time.
Yeah, at that time. So this special grant is by way of a development grant, right? It is for Sabah to catch up with the rest of Malaysia
Right.
in order for us. I mean, like I said, it must be an acknowledgement of how far back we were in that time. And in order for us to catch up, we needed this 40%. And that is the historical background and why it's very crucial because obviously, when we look at what we have today, we're still a long way behind.
Yeah.
Right. And if we ever had that 40%, we certainly would not be in this position today if we had it.
Right. So it was actually designed to safeguard Sabah's economic interests.
It was
Yeah.
designed to ensure that Sabah developed sufficiently
Okay.
vis-a-vis Malaya, for example.
Right. And in terms of the case, I mean, as I mentioned just now, that, SLS is bringing up the case with regards to this 40% entitlement. I mean, it's very clear. I mean, Sabah is the only state, as opposed to Sarawak, they don't have that specifically, a
Yes.
certain amount
Yeah.
of
a percentage.
percentage.
Yeah, a percentage. Yeah.
Whereas, Sabah has that 40%,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
So in terms of the interpretation, I think this is where, the crux of the issue is, the debates and the challenges has been going on over the past, 50 years now?
Yes.
50,
60 years.
60
Yeah,
years.
60 years,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Oh, yeah. We just
Yes.
celebrated 60 years of Malaysia. So for the past 60 years. So how has the interpretation revolved over time?
So I think, I mean, to be clear, one of the reasons why SLS actually started the action was
Yeah.
it's very obvious that you could never agree on the interpretation.
Yeah.
I've always said this, and I'll say this again. The federal constitution is difficult reading. Okay, you can read the same sentence 5 times and you wouldn't even know what it means. Right? It refers to this section, to that part, to subject to this, and then you have to bring the whole thing together.
Yeah.
And after you manage to do that, you probably don't even understand what you just read.
Sure.
So I think that is one of the main reasons why, until today, we can't agree on how to interpret this clause inside this article inside the Constitution. So the action was started because we knew if we couldn't agree on how to formulate this 40%,
Right.
you are never, ever going to get parties to agree. You need essentially a referee, and the correct referee is the courts.
Right.
Because don't forget, when it comes to a constitutional question, when you disagree on what the Constitution means,
Yeah.
you go to the court to interpret the Constitution to work out what it actually means.
Sure.
I have seen how many committees after committees being set up, and you know what is actually stated in the committee when they come to a position they can't agree on. Agree to disagree. Okay?
Yeah.
That is honestly the worst thing that you can see, because that's essentially like telling each other, sorry, we can't agree, and therefore let's move on.
Right.
Right? But that part of it remains forever unresolved because you just can't agree to how you calculate the 40%. So the whole action was premised on a hope that, number one, that you could find a court at the very, I mean, we don't have to agree. All we need to do is tell the court this is what we think it means. Everyone can tell the court what they think they mean.
Yeah.
Federal government can tell the court what they think that section means, and the state government can come, since they're a party now, to say what they think it means. And essentially, the court will decide for you what it means. Now, once you have an actual method of calculation, we call it a formula.
The formula, yeah.
Once you have the formula, it's just plugging in figures. That's the easy part, right? The figures are obviously available somewhere. Whether or not they ever want to share those figures with you, it's another issue. But once you have a formula, plugging in the figures will bring you to a sum, right? But they can't even agree on the formula to begin with. And that is why if we do not do something along these lines, you're forever caught. Let's be honest. How much is this figure? It's in the billions. And we're not talking about the low billions,
Yeah.
right? It's obviously in the high billions. 100, 200, I don't know. But it certainly will be not 1 billion. It certainly will be 10, 20, 30, if not hundreds of billions.
Right. Okay.
And I don't think it's in the federal government's interest to fix a figure, because once you fix a figure, you can make demands. If you keep it nebulous, if you keep it where no one actually knows the figure, you can fudge the issue and you can keep moving along and keep saying we're looking at it.
Right.
Because we all know if the figure ever came out, the actual figure, I think the people of Sabah would not appreciate any further delays, right? They will probably demand, I want this money. How do you go about giving it to me? So I think all of these things that are happening now is reflective of the fact that certain parties don't want that figure to be known, will ensure that that figure can never be arrived at because, number one, like you said, you don't have the formula. You don't have the formula, you can't do anything else.
Right.
That's the issue. Yeah.
Right. So before we go on any further, maybe perhaps we could, discuss about the legal action that was taken by, the Sabah Law Society in pursuing this pro bono, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Solely in the interest of the people of Sabah,
Absolutely.
without any political affiliations and party agendas. Now,
So can I just stop you there quickly? When the action was first started,
Right.
actually there were a lot of communications with other parties as well.
Okay.
Not necessarily political parties. I'm just talking about parties, people,
okay.
right?
Right.
So there were certainly a lot of people who were interested. However, SLS was of the view that it probably stood the best chance of establishing standing in the matter, and therefore it was best for SLS to go alone. And that's why, at the end of the day, notwithstanding that there were many overtures made by many different parties,
Okay.
we thought that if we needed to survive any locus issue, because that is how
Yeah.
the federal government will attack you straight away.
Locus standing.
Locus standing,
Yeah.
no standing, and therefore you're out the door.
Sure.
Given the unique creature that Sabah Law Society is,
Right.
which is a creature of statute, a statutory body with specific powers which are enshrined in the ordinance itself, we thought that we stood the best chance, given also the body of law established for the Malaysian bar, which also said that they have standing to do certain things. So on the basis of that, it was decided we should go alone because otherwise anyone else behind, they may get knocked out along the way, and that would just slow things down.
Right.
And we don't know who would be left standing at the end of it.
Yeah, because this was one of the issues that were, that was brought up at that time, about locus standi
Correct.
of SLS. But, can we then further discuss this? I mean, I just want to be safe here, discussion about this issue, would it be considered sub judice then?
I think no, because as long as you're not discussing in depth about
Yeah.
the issue and what you're submitting,
Right.
I think I think there has to be a great. We have to be very. We have to be very careful when we talk about what sub judice actually means.
Right.
There is, I've seen in Parliament where it's raised and it says, oh, the case is before the court, therefore it's
Yeah.
sub judice.
Correct.
But that in itself cannot be a blanket rule. Okay, it must be discussing about what is being submitted, what is actually being submitted. But if you're talking about generally, if I say to you what SLS is actually position, and I'm not discussing with what the other position is, and we are not saying whether they are correct or we are right or anybody's right. If we're just stating a position,
Right.
I cannot see how that can be sub judice. Sub judice actually means you influence the court's decision.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So if I'm stating a stand, this is what we stand for. I don't see how it can be sub judice because the court cannot be influenced with me, because the court still has to listen to all the different other parties in an action
Yeah.
and form their own opinion. But different, like I said, if I was saying, oh, the other side's raising this argument, that's complete nonsense, blah, 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 why? That could be sub judice, right? But
Right.
certainly if I was saying that this is our stand, that in itself cannot be sub judice. And certainly saying that just because a matter is before the court is not sub judice by itself. Okay?
Yeah.
I've noticed in Parliament they've said that,
Yes.
oh, it's before the court, therefore we cannot discuss.
Yeah.
How can that be a blanket rule, right? To say that you cannot therefore discuss about the special grant 40% because it's before the court
court,
already.
right.
So I think that, to me, is going too far. And it has to be dialed back a bit because obviously MPs, the elected parliamentarians, have to be able to discuss it to a certain degree, subject to sub judice, of course.
Right.
But what I've seen is rulings seem to be taking a very broad stand, which is like, just because it's before the court no one can discuss it.
Right.
And I, for the one life of me, cannot understand why Parliament is taking that position.
Right. So, before that, maybe we could just go back to, the background of the case that you brought to, the SLS, brought to, to pursuing the case against the federal government, so maybe a little facts of the case.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
So basically, what happened is this is a judicial review of the second order.
Yeah.
Okay. So the second order came out 50 years essentially after the first order, and in the second order, we realized very quickly. Number one, it has several parts to the order. The second order just mentions about figures from 2022 onwards for 5 years until 2027.
Right.
And you'll notice two things. Number one, in the order itself, there is no mention about any without prejudice rights to the what we call the lost years, which is effectively 79. 79, isn't it? Yeah.
74?
74, 5 years, 79.
Yes.
Yeah. 74, the first review was 74 until 79.
Yes.
So the years between 79 until 2022 are years that are not accounted for, and the second order makes no mention about these lost years. When, under the federal constitution, it says that there must be a second review done in 1979, isn't it? Yeah, in 1979.
Yes.
In 1979. So there was a first review done in 1976. 74, sorry. In 1974, the first review done, which was done.
Right.
But in 1979, when it was mandatory to do a review, it wasn't done. So what we're saying is that that is a breach of the Constitution, and because the second order makes no reference at all to this mandatory second review, therefore we are seeking a review of that second order. So that's the background of what the action is all about.
So if you're talking about the lost years, right, and it seems like suffice for us to say that the people of Sabah have actually endured the consequences of the breach over the last 48 years.
Yes.
Right. And so in terms of, legal or economic consequence, could this decision hold for Sabah and its people? What kind of legal and economic consequences?
Well, it's quite obvious. I think so. What are we getting at the moment? 300 million, or what? They've raised the figure up. So every budget you're promised an X amount, right? And I think that figure is about 300 plus million.
300 million.
Yeah, 300 million. However, that 300 million is the same 300 million that you got last year.
Right.
Okay. A lot of people don't understand that. So every year it seems like you're getting a lot of money. 300. It's not 300 million that I was given last year. I keep that money in my pocket, and then this year I was promised another 300 million, and I pocket another 300 million. So I've now got 600 million. And then next year you promise me another 300 million. It becomes 900 million and so on and so forth. No, it's the same 300 million that goes round in circles. What happens is I allocate 300 million to you. You must use it in that year. If you don't use it, next year round, when I say I give you 300 million, it was whatever you didn't use in the year before now gets carried on forward for your new 300 million. So let's be honest. How easy do you think it is to do massive infrastructure planning in 1 year?
In 1 year, yeah.
Plan, use it, utilize it, finish it off in 1 year. And the short answer is obviously it's difficult. And that is why, dare I say, the vast majority of what is allocated in the budget is not used up.
Yeah, definitely.
So it goes on to the next budget, right? So it's illusory. So what happens is, what we want to do is to get our guaranteed 40%, right? And like I said, I said this so many times and I'll say it again. How do we land in West Malaysia? We go into KLIA 1 or 2, it doesn't matter. Both of them are very nice, right? And when you come to Sabah's airport, you have an airport that we can barely keep the toilet lights alight. The air conditioning doesn't work.
No water.
Right? The water doesn't work.
Right.
And so we land in KLIA 1 or 2. It's very nice. And then when we get out, we have the KLIA Express, right? we have a choice. We either have the KLI Express, or of course we can catch Grab.
Yeah.
And we go along fantastic highways going all the way to KL or wherever you want to go, right? And when you get to KL, what do you have? You have monorail, you have LRT, you have commuter, you have rapid KL, you have, I wouldn't know what else is available, right? But isn't there an over accumulation or over focus on one particular area?
Yeah.
I think to myself, do you really need rapid KL when half those, no, I wouldn't say half, three quarters of those buses are empty? Are there anyone to jump onto a rapid KL bus during off-peak hours and you find that there's no one on the rapid KL buses? Compare that to Sabah. Where are our buses? Do we even have one bus, right?
Let alone the roads, Roger.
Yes, correct. So that's exactly what I was mentioning.
Yeah.
The roads from KLI, I can actually fall asleep and wake up in KL. Right here, I can't, because it's like trying to avoid potholes or hitting potholes all the way to KK.
Yeah.
Oh, short 15 minutes of it. But the point is, when we land, like I said, when we get to KL, we see the Twin Towers, right?
Right.
And what do we have here? Nothing. So what this 40% would do is to ensure at the very least we have a proper functioning airport.
Yeah.
Right? We have proper roads. You know, before I forget, I've got to say this. I had Chinese clients who were here and they asked, we were in Tawau, by the way. So we were driving from Tawau town to the airport. And the question that they asked was this: why are your roads so shaky? Okay. It's just not smooth.
Oh, right.
It's just not smooth, because if you're on a highway, it's smooth. You fall asleep, you're not going to be shaken awake. But along the way from Tawau to Tawau Airport, you can't sleep because the car's just constantly bumping along. Right? So that does not just apply to Tawau. Even in KK, you tell me how many smooth roads do we have? And why is it when we go on our flyovers, the flyovers cannot seem to be straight? We're always leaning at an angle, right? And I understand when you're turning a curve, you have to be at an angle. Engineers tell me that. But even on the flat road that's not turning anywhere, the road is at an angle. We can't seem to do our roads properly. We can't seem to get the proper smooth road, and this is all to do with infrastructure, not to mention, of course, our electricity, our water, and so on and so forth, right? These are all issues which, if you had the money, remember, like I said, by anyone's guesstimate, it'd be hundreds of billions of dollars, right? So if we had that money, what could we do? We could finally build our highway, no issues at all.
Yeah.
How many dams do you want? Not an issue at all, right? How many power plants do you want? Again, not an issue, right?
Yeah.
If only we had the money, right?
Right, and okay, coming back to the case that, I mean, the facts of the case that the judicial review that we are the SLS is bringing to the court now, regarding the as you mentioned that. In fact, in 2022, they came out with the order.
The second order.
The second order. Now, the question now is, does Sabah does this special order replace the 1970?
So that is, well, it doesn't, because you look at the order, it talks about 2022 to 2025.
Right.
So it's from then onwards, and there's no mention about anything. And that was one of the reasons why, again, like I said, why we took up, because it makes no mention about the lost years.
Yeah.
Right. So each order has got a specific purpose.
Yes.
Okay. Which is from 74 to 79. 74 to 79, and then this second order is for 2022 to 2025. There's no mention anything whatsoever regarding the lost years.
The 48 years.
The 48 years. And that is exactly what we're trying to get to the bottom of.
Sure.
We're saying that there's no way, what the stand is, there's no way it could have been replaced because it was never done. If it was done, certainly, it would have replaced the first order. Right? But because it was never done and it was mandated that it should have been done, how do you say that the first order continues when it should have been done at a particular date that was not.
Right. Yeah.
So I understand how a lot of people would argue, saying that
Yes.
yes, there's a part in the Constitution that says that if you can't come to an agreement, then the first review continues on.
Sure.
Right? But like I said, it doesn't take into account the fact that in 1979 there was meant to be a second review. So how do you take that into account? So that is exactly what we are bringing before the court and say, no, since there must have been one in 1979, obviously it could not have carried on until now.
Yeah, because, I mean, the question right now is because the state government has never done anything over the last 48 years, right? So meaning, the federal government, right? So does it mean that because nothing has been done for the last 48 years, means, it forfeits the... I mean, that's...
Generally, in general legal principles, you would argue that's how it is.
Yeah,
that's what
exactly.
we call, so, I mean, by conduct, perhaps we've waived
Right.
something. However, like I said, the federal constitution is the federal constitution. Federal constitution is not a secondary law. It's not something that you can just ignore.
Yes.
It guarantees certain things. It guarantees rights. It guarantees how your powers and your terms and conditions of forming Malaysia, including our 20 rights, a lot of it has made its way into the federal constitution. And one of it is this second review that needed to be done in 1979.
79, yeah.
So, no, you cannot. Our stand is, how do you waive something that must have been done?
Correct.
So we're saying that, no, you can't waive something even by conduct, just because you couldn't agree,
Right.
you should have been done. And this is the federal constitution. It is a constitutional right. And we say that when that word has a lot of meaning. My constitutional right essentially actually equates to my God-given right. Okay? So this is my God-given right to have a second review, which was not done. How can my God-given right be taken away? Any constitutional right must be complied with, and that's what we're saying. It cannot have been waived. It could not have been replaced because you must have done it in 1979, and for reasons unbeknownst to everybody, it was not done.
Yeah, yeah. And the next thing that, a lot of people, in fact, the parliamentarians, where we see, there is a different interpretation. I'm coming back to interpretation about, the 112C and 112D, right? And other provisions stated in 112C of the federal constitution reads together with, subsection 2(1), right? And is it the same as the provision found in 112D, Article 1 and 2D? Because, special grants and 40%,
Yeah. So the way I look at 112D is this. 112D is basically where it's a review. It's a review of the 112C. So 112C talks about the 40%. 112D is a review of the 40%, and you can come to a different amount from that position. Okay. So 112C is your 40%. 112D is where you review that 40% and you come to an agreement if you can. If not, it goes to the special what's it called? The special commissioner, is it? The third party to decide for you. So that's all it is. 112C guarantees you 40%. 112D says that you can review the 40%. But our stand is this: it cannot be a review in lacuna. Okay, meaning you cannot just be reviewing based on nothing. So we're saying that 112C and 112D are obviously clearly tied together. So the review of 112D is based on 112C, meaning the starting point has to be 40%. Can you imagine the ridiculous situation where, say, the federal government says, I'll give you 1 ringgit, okay? And the Sabah government says, no, I want 1 billion ringgit, okay? So how can that be? And when you go to the third party to decide whether or not what the figure is, what is the third party working on? You say 1 ringgit, you say 1 billion ringgit. What's next? There has to be a what's next, right?
Yes.
It cannot be like, okay, let's roll a dice now and let's see which figure we arrive at. So we say clearly the starting figure has to be 112C, which is 40%. Once you know what the 40% figure is, you're free to negotiate out of that. Okay? If you decide you want to take a lower figure or you even want to go for a higher figure, but at the very least, you have started from a figure. That is crucial, right? Because if you have no starting figure, any amount of negotiations is complete nonsensical. Like I said, it will just be one figure saying, "I'll give you the lowest." The other party saying, "I'll give you the high. I want the highest."
Yeah.
And there'll be never the twain shall meet, right? So what do you need to do? You need to read it with 112C and say that obviously the starting point has to be 40%.
40%,
And from the 40% figure, you're free to negotiate above or below it. Okay, but it cannot be something completely plucked out of from heaven, and you decide for yourself what that figure is. Like I said, if you were an arbitrator, which that third party is essentially an arbitrator, to work out a figure, you must have basis to work that figure out from. It cannot be you say 1 ringgit, I say 1 billion ringgit. And like I say, if I was an arbitrator, it'd be like, okay, that's the end of that. We can't agree. I don't even know how to put a figure at it. But if you told the arbitrator, the beginning point is 40%, subject to those things in 112D, ability to pay and so on and so forth, then the arbitrator can work out, okay, the starting point is 40, what's your ability to pay, whatever it is, right? Then we work out from there, plus minus, we arrive at a figure. You have a chance, and that surely must be what 112D meant, not for any third party to just pluck figures from the sky.
Right. So the nature of, maybe, what is actually the nature of the 40%? I mean, like...
So that is essentially the question.
Yes.
The formula.
The formula, exactly.
What is
yes.
the formula?
What's the nature?
So when you read it,
right,
it's an absolute mouthful. What it actually means. Again, like I said, you can read it over and over again.
Yeah.
I can't seem to understand exactly what it means, but essentially what it says is let me get this right. The all revenues derived from Sabah.
Just get...
all revenues derived from Sabah, obviously for the federal government, less allocations that they have given to Sabah, minus the starting point of 1963. Because remember we said it's a development grant. So what it actually means is that it takes into account when Sabah joined Malaysia, that was ground zero.
Right, okay.
Minus ground zero, which is less than 1963, we don't take that into account. We are only taking into account when Sabah joined Malaysia in 1963, we call that ground zero. When that is ground zero, we are only looking at the revenue derived from Sabah. Again, what does that mean, right? There are arguments about derived from Sabah means, for example, all of these palm oil plantation companies who grow palm oil here, but pay their taxes in KL. Even Petronas, for that matter, right, pay their taxes in KL. But their oil fields are in Sabah. All the big companies with oil plantation, palm oil plantations here, doesn't that mean revenue from Sabah, right? So all of this is another big question. Obviously, we would argue that revenue from Sabah must mean that, derived from Sabah. Anything that is derived from Sabah, including those plantations that get their profits from Sabah, regardless of where they pay their taxes, is a place that that includes that. So you add up all of these revenue derived from Sabah, okay, whatever that means, and we obviously say it's a big amount from encompassing everything, less the amounts allocated to the state. Now, this is another question that we've been debating with what it actually means, right? But, okay, notwithstanding that, so it's revenue derived from Sabah, less the revenue already allocated to Sabah, a figure. Then you minus it from ground zero to get a figure, because you only want the growth revenue from ground zero.
Right.
Okay, you don't want it from Sabah was in existence since goodness knows what year. So we take it from right down to 1700, whatever that figure is. It's just starting from when Sabah joined Malaysia. Whatever growth that happens, because let's be honest, Malaya does not have a lot of resources. A lot of the resources are in Sabah and Sarawak, right? Because they're in Sabah and Sarawak, obviously by Sabah joining Malaya to form Malaysia, a big chunk of that resources is going to go to develop Malaysia, right? And when it goes to develop Malaysia, all Sabah wanted was, we want 40% of that so that we can develop ourselves as well.
Yeah.
Right? So it only is from the period of growth that we join Malaysia. That is how fair this 40% rate is.
Right.
Like I said, it doesn't start from time immemorial, right? It starts from exactly when we join Malaysia. The growth, Sabah helps Malaysia to grow. We want 40% of that. Only that.
Yeah. So
yeah.
the nature of this revenue is actually the nature of growth revenue.
Growth revenue,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Growth
Okay.
revenue. From when you join Malaysia, and
Yeah.
because we are going to help Malaysia grow,
Yes.
we just want a share, our fair share, because we are pumping in the resources into helping Malaysia grow. And it's proven now, isn't it? Who is a savior for Malaysia time and time again? Petronas, right?
Yeah.
And where does Petronas get a majority of their oils and gas? Right, it's in East Malaysia.
Yeah.
Right, so it's proven time and time again that Malaysia has grown because of the resources from Sabah and Sarawak, and because of that, all Sabah is asking for is what you promised me for in return for me sharing my resources in helping Malaysia grow, which is guaranteed constitutionally, a constitutional right in the federal constitution.
Right. Now, I would like to discuss with you about, the ongoing, fiasco that has been going on in the last couple of weeks regarding this issue. So, as I mentioned earlier in this podcast, where, there's been it began with the Court of Appeal postponing the hearing to a later date. As
Yes,
we mentioned just now, is May next year.
May, I think it's 16th of May. It's either 14th or 16th of May. Yeah.
I was geared up on the 14th, but then I was told 2 days before
Yeah.
that. I was like, oh, isn't it?
So were we. Yeah.
Okay, that was sad. Anyway, and then additionally, there's this specific group of politicians who have chosen to withdraw the case, right? Citing that, favorable developments within the new federal government as the reason. Now, I think there's been multiple of committees, technical committees over the last couple of 60 years now, and we are still talking about committees after committees. Now, why should then Sabah Law Society continue pursuing this?
So, it's quite obvious.
Yeah.
So, if there is no pressure, whenever there's no pressure, there's no need to come up to any conclusion in a hurry.
Right.
So, we'd like to think,
Yes.
because of the action, and also because of the action filed by the other group of politicians,
Yes.
both of these gave an impetus to the federal government to come and arrive at something. Now, I think we're close to something because we have moved a lot closer than we ever have in arriving at something, whatever that something is, because there is something hanging over everyone's head. Do you want to negotiate now and come to a figure that everyone can agree with? Or do you want to let the court decide everyone's fate? Right? Of course, we prefer the court to decide everyone's fate.
Definitely.
Right? But I guess theoretically speaking, you could come negotiate an amount, right? But my only concern with that is what are you negotiating this amount based on? Okay? And no one seems to know what this amount is based on. 125 million increased to 300 plus million.
Right.
Right? Why do they sound so arbitrary? Right? What is 125 million?
Yeah.
Of what? Right? And this, now that you're saying, okay, I'm going to increase it to 300 million. Okay, 300 million is what? It's how many percent are we talking about? And I think the answer is it's no percent. Okay, it's just a figure, right? So when you negotiate, back to exactly what I was saying earlier on, you must be negotiating based on something. Otherwise, whatever figure you're negotiating on has got no meaning, right? It must obviously be close to the 40% that we're talking about, right? Whether up or down, but it must be around that figure. Can you imagine how silly it would be if, for example, the 40% is, say, 1 billion, right? And you agree to negotiate to 100 million, right? So why would you take 100 million when you can take 1 billion, when you're entitled to 1 billion? So that is my concern with negotiations, and that is why I think the reason why we are closer is because, like I said, there is something pressuring the federal government to move on, and without that pressure, they will just say, yeah, okay, let's have another committee after the next committee. which
Which
has
is
been
a
happening.
never-ending case
Yes,
for us. Yeah. And maybe I can get your view on this sort of legal battle between SLS, and then what's the standing of the Sabah government now on this case?
So, I mean, the Sabah government, to be fair, were not a party,
Yes.
right? Then they came in as a party, and which is a good thing, because one of the biggest problems that the action had to begin with was
Right.
because the state government was not in it, whatever decision that came out would not bind the state government. So by the state government joining the action, what it means is that if a court order comes out, it would bind everybody, including the state government. So that's one silver lining that came out of all of this. By joining it, it actually meant that the solution would bind everybody.
Right.
And it's actually not a bad idea, because what it means is that everyone can share their thoughts with the court, exactly what they think the formula is.
Yeah.
Right. And sort it out once and for all. You never want to have an argument where two people argue and there's a third party that was meant to have put in some input but never did, and so you come out to not a complete solution. So what this actually ensures is that there will be a complete solution if it goes on, proceeds to its a conclusion of having an order that comes out of it.
Right. So we're not trying to, the only concern that we are also looking to this, what are the consequences, for us to go against the federal government? I mean, we do not want to burn bridges, right? We do not
Correct.
want that.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, how would you foresee, these legal battles impact the relationship between federal government and ourselves?
So
here?
I think we're in a very unique point in time, which shall I dare say that it may never be repeated again.
Yes.
What has been happening in the past few elections with Sabah and Sarawak, the Borneo bloc, being a substantial kingmaker in which government is formed, may not repeat itself again. It may or it may not, right? So we are in a very unique position now, which has never been seen in the history of Malaysia, okay? To say that this is the time to negotiate and get what Sabah needs.
Yes.
Because if you do not do it now, you may never have this opportunity again. So are we burning bridges? I would say no, because from all my discussions with everybody I've met, including the federal AG and so on and so forth, as legal parties, we all know that there are certain legal issues that we cannot agree upon, right? And because we cannot agree upon, the proper body to decide is obviously the court.
The court,
right?
yes.
So I think if we were all mature about it, there are no bridges being burnt, because Sabah's stand is very simple. Hello, you were meant to have a mandatory review in 1979. It wasn't done, right? So now we want this to be done. And I do not think any federal government can deny that and say that that was not there. They will all agree that yes, it was there. Right. So we're not advancing something which is very fantastical, which no one can stomach, no one can swallow.
Yeah.
It is exactly what is provided for in the Constitution, but because parties could not agree, therefore, in these sort of circumstances, again, like I said, you need a referee. So I think if we were all mature about it, and so far I've seen that to be the case, everyone just actually does want a resolution.
Yes.
However, they would prefer a resolution which is a negotiated resolution rather than one that is made by the court.
Yeah.
So I think that is where the direction is going. And if it gets there, and if that figure is acceptable to everybody, including the people of Sabah, then we would say, fine, by all means, right? But if it doesn't, at the very least, there is an action that is there and it keeps moving. So it keeps moving independently of whether or not you can negotiate. Of course, if you negotiate, then it could be the end of our action. It may or may not be.
Yeah.
Right. But if you don't, and don't forget I remember when they first formed, when this new government came along, they said within 1 month, everything will be resolved, right?
Yeah.
So now the latest one is next year, July, right? I think. So now you can see it keeps. So what is going to happen in July? Are they going to say within another half a year we'll get a solution with whatever, right? But independent of that, you have the SLS court action that's moving along.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So as long as it keeps moving along, it will still be there, and it will be something that will be a constant reminder that things need to work out. Otherwise, eventually, if we succeed in getting standing, if we succeed in hearing the substantial part of it, the court will decide for you. Nothing for all of you to worry about. The court will decide for you. And like I said, obviously, maybe parties don't want to arrive at that because that figure, that formula, that solution may not be in their favor.
Right.
So they would rather negotiate something which they can stomach, I guess, best way of putting it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And looking at, the whole situation, the whole picture here, I mean, I can see the difference between Sabah and Sarawak, right? Sarawak, you can see that they're very united
Yes.
in bringing this. While in Sabah, it's just, disheartening to see when everything, especially about, this 40% entitlement and I mean, other things as well, which is, supposed to be our rights that needs to be implemented, are also, I'm sorry to say, but just being politicized,
Yep.
you see.
Yes.
And it is, like we are the young generation, and I see the fact that when we are not united, right, and you have one group of politicians who say this, I mean, they're coming up with their interpretation and their direction, the trajectory of where they're trying to bring this case to, and then we have the LSLS and the state government as well coming out with another way of strategy of dealing with this. So how do you see, I mean, how would this affect the outcome then? It's just a never ending thing. So going the same direction over and over again.
I think you hit the nail on the head, which is
Yeah.
Sarawak's very united. They
Correct.
will always take one stand and they will go along that one stand.
Sure.
Whereas Sabah, because we can't agree with each other,
Yeah.
we maybe don't do anything, okay? Because we can't take one united stand as we go along. Actually, Sabah can learn a lot from Sarawak's
Sarawak, yeah.
playbook. One thing is, and one thing which they have shown is this. For example, one of the reasons why Sabah, I won't use the word gave away, but one of the reasons why Sabah passed Labuan to federal territory is obviously they had not sufficient funds to develop Labuan.
Sure.
Okay, that's one. The other thing is why Sabah lost SASB and all of that is again similar reasons because we didn't have the funding, we didn't have the funds to develop a proper electricity providing infrastructure. Okay, so we didn't have the money. But my question is, did Sarawak started from the same level as Sabah?
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah, exactly.
They had the same rights as Sabah. Well, we have more rights, but similar rights, I should say, right? Similar rights. Did they give up any territory because they did not have the funding? The answer is
Exactly.
no, they didn't. Did they give up electricity rights because they didn't have the funds? No, they didn't. Okay. Sarawak, notwithstanding, they may not have had the funds to develop their state at that point in time. They never relinquished 1 inch. Okay. Whereas Sabah seems to have relinquished quite a lot of things.
Yeah.
Right. For the reason we didn't have the funding to develop these things, right? And because of that, once you give up something to get it back, as we can see, as proven, how hard it is to get it back. After 60 years, now we're talking about devolution actually happening, right? Ask this question 10 years ago and say, can we have this back? The answer would have been a flat outright no.
No, yeah.
Because once you give up a right, to get it back again is close to impossible. Sarawak was very smart. They stood united. They never gave anything away, and they speak with one voice. You will never hear two Sarawakians standing before in any meeting of importance have different views. They will, notwithstanding they may disagree with each other, right? But they will never show that to outsiders. They will always stand united, and they will say that. But unfortunately, Sabah, as we can see, we have just too many differing views, and we don't stand together with one voice. And unfortunately, we have given up a lot of things. And this is a historical fact, right? It's not me making it out, trying to run down any particular party or government. It's not. It's just a fact that we have given up things
Yes.
for certain reasons, right? And now we're fighting and clamoring to get it back. We may get it back. We probably will, right? For example, electricity, they talk about next year. But if we had not given that up to begin with, we wouldn't be in this position. Okay. So we are always playing catch up, always playing catch up. And this is where I think Sabah needs to stop. And we need to stand united and stand firm and go and speak with one voice, exactly like Sarawak.
Exactly. And I think also, if I may add to that, Roger, I think, since Sabah is being ruled by a plethora of political groups for this, I think, we are more advanced than any of the other states in Malaysia, where we can change, governments even in 2 years. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I think that, when the state's government is in a state of extreme instability, and I think this is also maybe part of the reason why it's very hard for us to also, we have lack of bargaining power, I would say, as opposed to Sarawak. Yeah.
Agreed.
So again, it all boils down to the Sabahans has to be united in, trying to get their rights back.
Our politicians must speak with one voice, right? And if you don't, I mean, it's just pure, simple logic. If I look at you, if I was from a position of power and I look at you on the other side and I can see you're all in disarray, obviously I'm in a stronger position and there's less of a need to discuss with you because all of you can't even agree amongst yourself.
Yes.
Right? But if you have someone like Sarawak coming at you as a singular strong body, I as the perceived stronger body, I need to listen to you. Right? Rather than if I talk to this person over here, he'll tell me something else, and I will talk to this other person here, he'll tell me something else, and then so on and so forth.
Sure.
Right? So it does not give the federal government any real desire or need to actually come to a conclusion. Now, I've seen that improve, I have to say, over the past, shall I say, 10 years. It's improved. It has continuously improved, right? And I think one thing I can say about this so-called MA63 movement is this. We were late to the party. Okay, Sarawak has been doing this for a long time.
Sure.
But what is amazing now is I can see this thing, this MA63 Sabah rights is now out in the open. You can never ever shove this genie back into the lamp. Okay, any politician, be it federal or state, who ignores this is out. All right. So, and this is a promising thing because for the first time in my life, I can actually see something in the future. Previously, I couldn't see a future. I mean, I like many people in Sabah would say, where is Sabah's future?
It's hopeless, something like that.
When I look at where we are now, and it's been a long and hard journey, right? But where we are now and where we could go in the near future, I say that if we get our act together, we certainly have a chance to fly. And what is very important now is with the promise of so much money coming in. Okay, so now, I mean, don't talk about the 40%. With your increased oil and gas revenue coming in, with the increased taxes coming in, and so on and so forth, we are sitting on something that is potentially much bigger than what we had in the past.
Right.
So it's very crucial we have the right political leaders to lead us into the next phase of Sabah. Okay, because I think we have wasted enough time in the past. So now it's to move on forward. And it's very crucial that with the money coming in, we have a good government, good governance to make sure that the money that is coming in is going to be spent wisely, rightly for the development of Sabah. But with that, like I said, I see that there is a future. If we can only get everything right, Sabah has got a bright future moving forward. For the first time, I can actually say that.
Right, that's very promising because, every now and again, I mean, over the last couple of years or so, we've seen a lot of the younger generations have actually left this, they have left the state, everyone would see that, living in Sabah is just being a hopeless state.
Yes.
Right. And I the reason being, I've stayed in Sabah too. I mean, I could have the opportunity to perhaps, go overseas and get another job there and earn much more than what, what we are having here in Sabah. But I am with you, Roger, because I see that there is a future in Sabah, provided that the Sabahans, especially, we have to say it straight, but the politicians and whoever is in government right now has to be united, and along with the civil society, like yourself and many others. If the Sabahans are united, I believe that Sabah can propel way further.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah.
100%. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe as to wrap things up, and lastly, I would like to maybe you could share with our the followers and our listeners here how can the Sabahans unite and support the efforts led by SLS coming.
Sure. So what is very crucial, just brief explanation, not to bore you with legalese. So in a judicial review, basically there are two steps. One is you need permission from the court to move on.
Right.
That's where you have to establish that you have the standing. And once you get permission from the court to move on, then you argue about the substantive issues, which is how do you formulate the 40% and about the lost shares and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So at the moment, the Sabah Law Society has managed to clear the first hurdle, which is the court has given us permission to move on to the substantive part of the hearing. However, the federal government has appealed on that, and that hearing was meant to be on September 14th of September. However, for various reasons, it was adjourned until May next year, 14th or 16th of May. I think 16th of May.
Okay.
16th of May. As we were saying, for the 14th of September hearing, what we encourage every Sabahan to do is to come to court to show the court, to show how important this is to the people of Sabah. It's an open court. You can all come to court. You can come and listen if you can make your way in, right? And it's open for everyone to get there to listen to the case. And by listening to the case, what it will show is that there are many Sabahans who actually care about this case, and it actually shows that it is important to the people of Sabah. So we hope come 16th of May, please check to confirm that, our Facebook page. Come 16th of May, as many of you that can make it, please come to court for the Court of Appeal hearing, and because we obviously need to clear the appeal. If we can clear the appeal, then we can actually go to the meat of the judicial review, which is how do you calculate the 40%? If we don't clear this appeal, it will just die in the water straight away. So it's very crucial that everyone comes and support it if they can, so that everyone knows how important this is to the people of Sabah.
Right. Thank you, Roger. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's remember that the importance of unity and action for Sabah's future is very crucial, is very important. And each one of us, from political leaders to young entrepreneurs, plays a very vital role in shaping the state's destiny, right? And what exactly we want is just what we're entitled for from the day that we joined Malaysia.
Yes.
Joined Malaysia. We formed Malaysia.
Yes.
Let me get that right. We formed Malaysia. Now, and our goal is to build a future nation in accordance to the Constitution, right? And that for Malaysia. And I believe for myself, I think, Putrajaya also needs to prove its sincerity, of wanting to solve this issue too. And establish a genuine cooperation between Sabah and Sarawak. And that's what I hope for from as a Sabahan.
I hope so too.
Yes, as a Sabahan, right? So, in the spirit of unity and justice and principles enshrined in the federal constitution, ladies and gentlemen, let us collectively seek to preserve and protect the rights of Sabahan and honor the promises made by our great nation that was formed in 1963. So together, we can ensure that the 40% of Sabah's entitlement remains a symbol of progress, prosperity, and fairness for all. So thank you so much, Roger, for being
Thank you for
with
inviting
me
me. It's
and
been a
here
pleasure.
in this podcast. And see you again next episode. And goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.